Now, more fallout from the Penn State sexual abuse scandal and the announcement that coaching great Joe Paterno will retire. Ray Suarez has our update.
Late this morning, the legendary coach, who was Penn State in many ways, announced he'd leave after this season amid the child sex abuse scandal engulfing the university. In a statement, Joe Paterno said, "I'm absolutely devastated by the developments in this case. I grieve for the children and their families. It's one of the great sorrows of my life. With the benefit of hindsight, I wish I had done more." After 62 years on campus, 46 as head coach, 409 wins, a major college record, and 2 national titles, all of Joe Paterno's career stats were overwhelmed by a single number: 8. That's the number of young boys allegedly molested by Jerry Sandusky over 15 years, according to initial charges. The former longtime defensive coach, who retired in 1999, was once Paterno's heir apparent. Sandusky is now 67. He was arrested Saturday on 40 counts of child sexual abuse. From there, the focus quickly fell on what Paterno did and did not do when a graduate assistant told him in 2002 that he'd seen Sandusky raping a child in a locker room shower. Paterno did not inform police. Instead, he told Penn State athletic director Tim Curley. Now, Curley and a Penn State vice president are charged with perjury and failure to report the alleged abuse to authorities. Paterno has not been charged. Last night, there was no mistaking the show of support for the embattled coach outside his home. Hundreds of students gathered for the man dubbed Joe Pa. Paterno spoke to the focus of the case.
There's been some criticism of the way we've handled some of the poor victims. My wife and I, we have 17 grandkids, from 16 to 3, and we pray for them every night. We're going to start praying for those kids that got involved with some of the problems that we talked about.
The exuberance didn't end, and the coach emerged once more.
It's hard for me to tell you how much this means to me. All right, you guys, I've lived for this place. I've lived for people like you guys.
For now, Paterno plans to be on the sidelines this Saturday when Penn State plays Nebraska in the Nittany Lions' final home game this season. But he may never get the chance to coach that game. The university's Board of Trustees could order his immediate ouster. Multiple reports this evening suggested that University President Graham Spanier could resign or be forced out by the school trustees tonight. And the U.S. Department of Education announced it will investigate Penn State's handling of the child abuse case. We look at the questions surrounding the school, including the legal and ethical issues at stake. Jeff Anderson is a trial lawyer who runs his own practice, specializing in representing victims of childhood sexual abuse. Jeff, let's begin with where this story begins, with a member of the football team's staff seeing what he thinks is the commission of a crime in a university facility, Jerry Sandusky raping a young man, a boy. What legal obligations, right? Not suggestions, not ethical obligations, but what legal obligations come into play at that moment?
Well, every adult in this scenario has a legal obligation to report any suspicion of sexual abuse, any suspicion to those trained to investigate, that is, to child protection or law enforcement. And the failure of the individuals to do that is a failure of their legal obligation, not to mention their moral.
In this case, the young graduate assistant reported to his superior, Joe Paterno. Now, at that point, it becomes a hearsay story. What's Mr. Paterno's responsibility at that point, legally?
Well, yeah, first, reporting it up the line or down the line doesn't make it. You report it to police, and they investigate it because that's where they're trained. Joe Paterno's responsibility, once he received the report, was to do the same thing. Turn it over to law enforcement, let them investigate it. And Joe Paterno failed in his obligations, both moral and legal. And that really leads the larger question here. This is institutional failure as well as individual failure of trusted adults. And it is the institution that failed the kids on multiple levels from the top to the bottom. And so the resignation of Joe Paterno or the resignation of the president in itself doesn't address the culture and the institutional failure. What really has to be done here now is the institution has to acknowledge their failures and rigorously commit themselves to training and preventing this from happening again, and rigorously reaching out and acknowledging the failures of the past.
In this particular case, Joe Paterno said he turned it over to his superiors. Now, at that point, he says he's dispensed his obligations. His spokesman, his own son, Scott Paterno, says he's dispensed his obligations. And in fact, no one's saying they're contemplating any charges against Joe Paterno. What happens next?
Well, when you hear of that, it is remindful of what happens in the Roman Catholic Church hierarchy. It's really just obedience to silence and a culture of self-protection, putting reputation above safety of children, reporting up the line or down the line and telling others in that culture of silence and self-protection doesn't protect kids. The only thing that protects the kids is action. That is reporting to law enforcement and then training those that are required to report and act. In this case, they didn't. And so as a result, we know of 8. We know there are dozens more yet suffering in silence, ready to come forward. And we know this institution is a real opportunity for a teaching moment, for them to learn the lesson of their failures and then rigorously employ practices that will prevent other kids from being harmed across all cultural lines and institutional boundaries.
In this case, you're dealing with an institution in Penn State University that is takes up a huge space in the culture of central Pennsylvania. You're dealing with people who are prominent, well known from in every corner of the state, but especially right there in State College, PA. Does it become more difficult? Is it more complicated when you're dealing with prominent people inside a culture that is very much devoted to the maintenance and the success of that place?
Well, really, you hit the nail on the head. The problem is the more powerful and revered the institution, the more difficult it becomes for anybody within it to expose the underbelly or report the sexual abuse and take action. And because it is such a powerful and revered institution, everybody here deferred to the institution to preserve its reputation and forgot about the kids. And that is what is the problem in our most powerful and trusted institutions. The kids are at greatest peril because the most powerful and trusted predators in those institutions are given the most protection.
Is it often the case in your practice where molesters are not scary strangers, but people who go out of their way over time to gain the confidence and create intimacy with their eventual victims?
Well, in our practice across the country for 3 decades and in Pennsylvania has been a demonstration of serial predators who are very trustworthy, the most prominent in our community, given great deference because they are so trusted, and they continue to offend and reoffend, even with those around them knowing, not wanting to believe or report, and thus they're given permission, and in effect the fox is put back into the hen house and kept in that position of trust, most notably demonstrated in the Catholic clerical culture, where we've seen that demonstrated time and time again across the country, and as we've seen it demonstrated in other protective institutions, where powerful figures are given deference because they we don't want to believe, we don't want to see, we don't want to hear, and when they get caught, oftentimes are afraid to act or believe that they could do what Sandusky did.
what he has allegedly, what he's been accused of doing. But Jeff Anderson, thanks a lot for joining us tonight.
You're welcome.